Right, we're going to get started and kick off this fantastic two-day conference. My name is Teresa Küchler, I'm the moderator, and you will be seeing me, and I'm also going to be the harsh teacher to tell you to come back to the room, but I'm also going to be the bearer of very good news. I'll tell you when there's time for coffee and sweets and excellent food that will be given here. I have a couple of house rules, very simple ones, before we even start, and that is you need to know where the emergency exits are. So that side, if you look behind you, and then obviously the exit door, and then as you remember, the exit door is just by the exit of the house. Toilets, we have men's toilets and women's toilets next to the wardrobe, and then we have intersex toilets in the middle of the building by the reception desk where you took your badges. There is one toilet for a handicapped toilet, which is next to the wardrobe, so left if you leave this room. If any of you have any questions about this building and where to find things, we have amazing Susanna, is the woman with the blonde hair, black glasses, and very funky pink shoes. She will take all your questions like she's taken all of ours today. Right, we have a packed program, so I'm going to get started immediately. We have with us a fantastic keynote speaker today, the former president of Finland, Tarja Halonen, and she will be speaking to you in a second. But first, we're going to have a couple of words from the organizers of this conference, Social Platform. And I think I'm going to immediately turn to the president of Social Platform, Mr. Piotr Sadowski. You can tell us about the conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa. Hyvää iltapäivää. Good afternoon. Dear President Halonen, Director General Niemi, dear Ronald, dear friends. I would like to welcome you all to Helsinki. And I'm really delighted that our second flagship conference is taking place in Finland, and it's actually recognized as an official side event of the Finnish presidency of the Council of the EU. 2 years ago, the European Pillar of Social Rights was proclaimed as an affirmation of EU leaders' political commitment to a truly socially and economically just Europe. It came at a time when Europe was beginning to come out of a decade-long financial and economic crisis, and that crisis shook Europe to its core. And during that decade, while implementing very stringent national austerity measures, the EU, paradoxically, committed itself to fighting poverty and social exclusion. As a result, and not surprisingly really, the targets of Europe 2020 strategy were not met. And the EU continued to face obstacles to achieving socio-economic justice for every one of its over 500 million inhabitants. So we as Social Platform saw the European Pillar of Social Rights as a new window of opportunity, as a tool that can ensure the enjoyment of social standards, quality employment, adequate social protection, access to community-based services, that it becomes a reality for all people in the European Union. At the same time, it came as a strategic moment for the EU. We had the upcoming European elections, discussions on the future of Europe, on the new multi-annual financial framework, and the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. These were just some of those areas where the argument for a much broader EU social agenda, which goes beyond employment and economic growth, could gain real traction and a start. And it did, because then, together with our members and with many partners, we have been advocating the pillar's implementation, pushing for policies, for legislation, for funding, for social and environmental governance. And for that reason, the social pillar will be a crucial element of our discussions here in Helsinki. But Social Platform is also a civil society actor. And amongst our members and their members, we're representing hundreds of thousands of organizations throughout Europe. So we as Social Platform, we want to be a responsible, active citizen. And we have assumed this responsibility to act together with many other stakeholders across sectors to bring about meaningful social progress in Europe and in societies. And we believe that our actions are necessary to make the common good prevail over the interests and benefits of just a few. And we strongly believe that our actions are fundamental and they are an important part of a well-functioning democracy. because the role that civil society plays is recognized in European treaties. But in practice and in reality, we often ask ourselves, where is our place? What is our role? Are we recognized? Are we respected? How can politics be done differently so that all people are heard and they're included and empowered to meaningfully shape our communities? These questions will be at the core of this afternoon's debate, because if we want to achieve positive societal changes which serve the common interest of all people and leave no one behind, we need to cooperate and we need to co-create. As I mentioned before, the Flagship conference is organized in partnership with the Finnish Ministry of Social Affairs and Health and is included as part of the official program of the Finnish presidency of the Council of the EU. So I really would like to showcase this as an excellent example of cooperation, for which we are very grateful to the ministry, because really this cooperation has not been just about organizing an event, but very much about engaging in a cross-sectoral dialogue, a dialogue which actively contributes for us to policy development. And now on to the economy. The Finnish presidency is promoting the umbrella concept of the economy of well-being, which is defined in many ways, but I will try to just summarize it. Economy of well-being is one whereby well-being and economic policies are closely intertwined and mutually reinforcing. It is also the key concept of the upcoming Finnish government's high-level conference, which is taking place on Wednesday and Thursday here in Helsinki. And the aim of that high-level conference is to generate themes which will be included in the forthcoming Council conclusions on the economy of well-being. We have already engaged at different occasions with Finnish authorities in relation to those Council conclusions. But right now we're really delighted that the key messages and findings from our Flagship conference, debates and workshops will contribute to the discussions on the economy of well-being at this high-level conference in Helsinki. Because as a social platform, we have certainly been calling for a European Union that makes the economy work for all people. Because as we know, over the last decade, economic, financial and monetary policies have paid way too little attention to their impact on people, especially those people who are finding themselves in vulnerable situations. Just to mention things like austerity measures, which have cut back investment in social welfare and services, in health, in education. Therefore, our event will also be addressing the questions of how to create an economy that serves social justice, because we do not believe in trickle-down economics. Social cohesion and environmental sustainability must be recognized as core objectives of economic and monetary policy reforms, and not just as a side add-on. Our current economic growth models must be reviewed to ensure that the economy first and foremost serves the interests of people and the environment. And we really, really hope that the Finnish presidency and the upcoming EU presidencies will share this view, and so that it will be shared by the new European Commission, which is to include an executive vice president for an economy that works for people. So as a social platform, we very much look forward to continuing to build a strong social Europe together. And I would really like to thank everyone who has made this conference possible. Not to single out anyone, but I would like to thank the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health of Finland. I would like to thank SOSTE, and particularly I would like to thank Karina, who Juris, my colleague from the Secretariat, says has been his right hand here in Helsinki. So before I go on with the thanks, I would like Karina to come up front for a moment.
And from Belgium, I presume, of course. If you had a good photo opportunity there, I can also remind you that you can tweet from this conference nice photos or quotes that you find extra interesting. There is a hashtag Building Social Europe. So by all means, spread the word.
Thank you, and sorry for that interlude, but I thought it was really necessary for us to recognize the help and the support of SOSTE. We would like to thank the city of Helsinki. Of course, our thanks go to European Commission's Europe for Citizens program and its executive agency. We would like to thank all social platform member networks and their members, all our speakers, workshop leaders, and participants, my colleagues in the Social Platform Management Committee. Nearly all of them are here, and I'm really, really happy to have you here with us. And last but not least, I would like to thank all the Social Platform Secretariat staff. Thank you very much.
We're now going to have a couple of words from the host country, from Finland, and from the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health. We have with us the Director General for EU and International Affairs, Mr. Veli-Mikko Niemi, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, President Halonen, dear participants of this conference, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to be here today with you. On behalf of the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, I would like warmly welcome you to Helsinki. We are very pleased that Social Platform is organizing this flagship conference in Helsinki in cooperation with the Finnish EU presidency. As the EU presidency, of course, Finland wants to make an impact in the policies in the EU, and in particular for the future of the EU. That future should be socially, economically and ecologically sustainable. And that's why the slogan for our presidency states the goal: sustainable Europe, sustainable future. A key priority of Finland's presidency in the EU's global leadership in climate action. This means committing to climate neutrality by 2050, and for that purpose we need a long-term strategy in the EU. Measures to fight climate change must be carried out in a social just way. These measures will have a real impact on all sectors of society. Indeed, a competitive and socially inclusive EU is another priority of our presidency. Furthermore, Finland wishes to strengthen common values and the rule of law. Human rights, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law are all values that EU countries commit to as part of the membership. During our presidency, we highlight the need to protect the citizens comprehensively. The main theme for the Finnish Ministry of Social Affairs and Health during our presidency, the economy of well-being, is part of the Finnish presidency program. With the economy of well-being, we want to increase understanding in the EU of how well-being policies can boost productivity, generate economic growth, create jobs, and support economic sustainability and social stability. In addition to the fact that well-being is, of course, a key value as itself. The European Pillar of Social Rights provides a compass for renewed upward convergence towards better working and living conditions in the Union. Delivering on the pillar is a shared political commitment and responsibility of the Union and the Member States. The economy of well-being supplements the pillar and contributes to the aims and implementation of the pillar in line with the new EU Strategic Agenda 2019-2024. Moreover, it contributes to the European social model, empowering all people by promoting upward social and economic convergence. During this week, a high-level conference of the economy of well-being will be held in Helsinki, as was mentioned already. And with this conference, we wish to invoke discussion on the approach itself. You can follow the conference online from our President website. We are very happy to witness that different civil society organizations are also discussing on sustainable future and societies. After all, with our theme, Economy of Wellbeing, we aim to strengthen cross-sectoral and horizontal approaches when it comes to well-being of people, inclusive growth, and sustainable Europe. Thus, cooperation with civil society organizations should not be neglected. This is why we are very pleased that the Flagship conference, among so many other events of this week, is participating in the discussion on the economy of well-being. Let's keep this close cooperation and communication with civil society organizations going also in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The European social pillar and the economy of well-being, it sounds very simple, doesn't it? Social inclusion. But if you worked with EU policy, like I have done for many, many years, and like some of the gentlemen here are dealing with on a daily basis, you would know that even to include the word social as a target for the European Union, something that the European Union should deal with, you know, housing, minimum wages, including this, a lot of people say, oof, this is not what the EU does. We do trade, and we leave it up to the member states to do all those other softer things. So this is a crossroads that we're at now, that we're on a high level, European Union level, discussing something as a social pillar, which is some kind of strategy for you know, social inclusions of people. And the Finnish economy of well-being is the latest buzzword now. And I would say that I'm very surprised that it has reached this high level with all the European Union countries on board. We're going to have a little bit more on that. I advise you to actually read the social pillar, the points in it. It's quite extraordinary. The next speaker, however, is Mr. Ronald Wieman, and he is the Europe Region President of the International Council on Social Welfare, and he's also chair of the Finnish chapter of the International Council on Social Welfare, and he's also then from the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health. And the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable former President of Finland, Minister Tarja Halonen, distinguished participants and colleagues. It is indeed an honor and also a personal pleasure to welcome you to this conference on behalf of International Council on Social Welfare, ICSW as we say it, and of SOSTE, the Finnish Federation of Social Welfare, Social Sector and Health. This conference is, as said, the second follow-up of the Gothenburg Declaration of the European Pillar of Social Rights. The first one was held in Portugal and in last year, November. The organizers asked me to tell a little bit behind the story how we ended up with the second conference in Helsinki. It all started last year, May. ICSW is a member of Social Platform, and we participated in the General Assembly of Social Platform in Brussels. The management of Social Platform asked whether we maybe could find out if Finland would be interested in facilitating the implementation of Social Pillar, maybe during its EU presidency. So, we already knew that Finland had its theme as the well-being of economics of well-being as its social theme for the presidency. And the preparatory team of Finland's presidency, they, of course, they told that, this is a reason. The reason for this theme is that the lingua franca of European Union tends to be economics. So how could we then connect the rights-based approach to the well-being economy dimension, which was chosen as the Finnish main theme? In the following informal consultations, it became very early clear that Finland was extremely interested to join hands with civil society to strengthen the message that the ultimate aim of European Union is to promote the well-being of its people. And a joint tune was easily found. Well-being economy that works for people, is actually one of the major instruments for materializing the social, economic and cultural rights of people. So in the first follow-up conference in Portugal, some people were disappointed that the pillar is not a legal instrument which could be enforced. But then it was concluded that as this is the case, so we have to adopt another approach, a political approach, which means involve the people and join forces with like-minded governments such as Portugal and Finland and certainly many others to come. It is now indeed very encouraging to see how all the events of this week seem to be well connected and synchronized, and how the programs connect civil society, EU institutions, governments, and their representatives. ICSW sees the mission of this conference as joining forces in putting people at the center of Europe's sustainable development agenda, as beneficiaries and as agents of action. On behalf of ICSW and SOSTE, I wish to thank all speakers and participants for joining this conference. Together, we can take an important step forward towards the vision of an inclusive, socially just, ecologically sustainable, and economically sound Europe for all its citizens. Thank you.
And we're now going to turn to our keynote speaker, Ms. Tarja Halonen, former president of Finland, but not only that, he also has a background in everything from student activism to trade unions to working with human rights, gender equality. I think everything on this CV that you have in your packs basically leads up to this conference. So we are very, very honored to have you here. And if you would come up here to the podium. Thank you.
So hello everybody. Yeah, I feel sometimes a little bit uncomfortable when everybody tells that what I have been. So I feel myself almost like half dead. But anyway, I have been asked to speak about, especially now, plus all this what you have heard, a little bit also social dimension concerning the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. So I'm sure that we all here, we are very committed to speed up the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. But we know also that it's not an easy task. Sustainable Development Goals are not just one issue, but a multiply target. And in that way, it's a part of the modern society. Because we all know that we are at the moment living under multiple chains as we try to solve and deliver and understand the importance of achieving also these goals, which are all together. So every one of these goals is, of course, important, but what makes it more difficult is that there are also interlinkages between the different targets, different goals, and we don't know exactly how this will go. The system analysis is still halfway, but we hope that we can all the time to learn to know more about that. So taking some steps backwards, we can understand what we will have future to come. So I think that we have been active in many forums, many of us, so that we remember how Davos Economic Forum is always underlying the economical dimension. We know that Rio has been combining development and environment. And then some of us, quite many in the matter of fact, when I'm seeing your faces, I think that you have seen already the Millennium Goals. And Millennium Goals as such was, like my friends from the South very often say, that it's the first global social justice agreement. And it was very warmly welcomed on that. And with, now with Millennium Development Goals, we are trying to combine all these together. In 2015, the importance of linking development goals was seen in a way that each goal is appreciated as an individual target, but also that they should be, as I mentioned, to have this connection between each other. So still already during these years what we have seen, I think that we have seen that some goals are easier to achieve than the others. And I would say that I would welcome you to take a social dimension, because it seems to be so that it's very easily the fact what everybody is adding in the end of the speech. But before that, they speak a long time concerning economics or environmental issues, what we have in the climate change. But then the social dimension is more or less an obligatory must in the end. So I think that that you are the very good persons to try to solve this issue, how to put them really together. And I even take some of the European aspects on that. We are very much speaking about the human rights, but normally when we speak about the human rights, we think just the political rights. And it can be seen also in different sectors of the society. So, for instance, I come later on more on that we have this refugee issue or asylum seekers issue. So very often it was discussed that whether these people really had political reasons to escape. But the fact which will be in the future as important is that whether they have such kind of the social needs, whether they have such kind of the environmental situation that they had to leave. And more we study the issue, the more difficult it is to see the borders, the limits between the different aspects. The social and cultural dimension is also in other way very vital. People need to feel that these processes are actually the ones they possess. Even though we comprehend the sustainable goals as one, we have that's why also again and again to emphasize the importance of social dimension. If we think then people's everyday routines, how they feel, their human rights situation, so very often it's coming back to the social dimension, whether they have the possibilities to get a job, whether they have a possibility to get the health services, whether they feel that they years with the old age will be safe, and many other such kind of the issues. Little by little, they have been also concerned about the environmental things, and economics comes somewhere, but how they feel it, it's through the social dimension. So we have seen quite much the political demonstrations and movements in recent years in Europe. And most of these demonstrations have been because of the lack of the social dimension. We have had, of course, some of the demonstrations concerning the climate change, especially by the young people, but we have had also the demonstrations which has been caused because countries have tried to limit, for instance, the things which might cause more rapid climate change. For instance, let's take France as an example. So when we see these new political movements, and in early days it was very often said that they are these silent people in the society, but they are no more silent. We can see them in Sweden and Finland. We are now also had an elections where this part of the everyday life, whether it's good enough, becoming more and more important. And I think that just now in Sweden and in Finland, we have also now the governments appreciating and giving more social dimension role in the discussions. And I'm very happy that Finland now holding the presidency of the Council of EU has also a role to play. When I compare two very dear old friends of mine in European politics, so of course we have the Council of Europe and then we have the European Union. And many of you are coming from the countries which has been a long time the members of the Council of Europe, but who have worked very much in order to become the members in the European Union. And of course, the official text has been always that they want to become full members of European Union in order to have also a role in the European politics. And we used to say also in a little bit older member countries that that's because they are lacking the democratic processes and so on. But we should be also more honest in that sense. Very often it has been also the interest concerning the economic growth, perhaps the employment, and so on. And now when we are all members of the European Union, social dimension is quite strongly limited just to the members of the EU. And this is, of course, also a problematic approach. I hope that European Union could emphasize a little bit more for the social dimension, but it has been mainly interested in economics. And in a way, I could say that nicely that the social dimension has not yet found a place in the context of the Europe and globalization as much as we could hope. I hope it will come a day then when it has been done. But of course, we know and we say very easily that the borders between the nation states have been already fading, that they are not so clear, and we have accepted it as members of the Council of Europe, as members of the European Union. But at the same time, it's much more difficult to understand that what comes to the climate change, biodiversity, or different phenomena of the climate change, otherwise, the borders are also fading. We should find the new type of the consensus to serve the planet at its well-being. So when it comes to the people moving from one country to another, especially if it happens in the European Union, of course, we cannot speak anymore in that way, the borders, but also when it comes concerning the asylum seekers or already refugees outside the EU, also the borders are fading. So social dimension has then a big role. And when we speak about the social justice, to whom we think that it is a social justice. I understand very well that Europe cannot take all the asylum seekers of the world, but then we should of course understand also the reasons and study the reasons why the people are moving. They don't do it just because of the pressure, they do because they have to. And that's why I really hope so that we will have a little bit closer look for this. But still one short mention concerning the poverty. Unemployment has been a very, how could I say, the common problem in Europe through the years. And for instance, in this country, Finland, we faced a very strong economic stagnation in early 1990s. And then in that time, we tried to keep also the unemployed people very active members as a society. And in those days, Suomalaisen kirjallisuuden seura, the Finnish literature organization, organized a competition for unemployed people, that they could write how they feel the unemployment to be. And then we made it again this year, when we have had also the unemployment. In 1990s, when people described the unemployment, they described it quite much that it's also something which is a part of the social structure of our society. Of course, they also thought what they could do by themselves and so, but they took it quite much about as our common problem. This year, when we have the same competition, I was sitting in the board to see these fantastic novels again, stories. But now you already guess what has happened. They were speaking, writing all the time that what are their personal problems, how they could be perhaps a different kind of studies or what they should do to tackle the unemployment. But this analysis concerning the society itself, you hardly saw it. So we have in a way, we have succeeded to privatize the poverty. That it's everybody's own sin or own, how could I say, unsuccessful approach to the life. And of course, it's always the combination of both. And that comes also more to the poverty, what is one of your subjects. It has become much more mosaic type. As we very often say here in Finland, that you don't know that how poor people are living behind the next door of your neighborhood. Of course, you have the classification in such a way that some areas of the cities might have with more poor people than the others, but anyway, people don't dare to tell that they are poor. If they have difficulties with their economics, they will pay their credits to the banks in order to keep their housing, but at the same time, behind the corner, they are queuing the food. So it's not anymore such kind of the class phenomenon what it used to be when I was a child, that people were quite, how could I say, not proud or happy, but they could say that, yes, this is the problem of our working class people. Nowadays, it's such kind of the collective feeling that how we should do this has been quite quiet. But now it has come again in the other side, even that we have not noticed it. And I think that these are also part of the roots of the populism. And I don't mean that all these people are very poor. I mean only that they are afraid of their social status. They feel that they might become more poor. And that's also a fact. So, what do then? Of course, I will still say that the governments of the nation states have a big role, but we know already from the SDGs, where we made a program, Agenda 2030, we don't say that only that the government should do this or that. Of course, we are sorry if Mr. Trump is not happy with the climate change agreement, which is the only judicial part of the Agenda 2030. But in a way, we have put already in the premises of the sustainable development system that we are asking the heads of the state, the governments, parliaments, but also NGOs, we are asking the business community, academia, universities, etc., all kind of people. And then we say that every one of you should think how you are, which kind of the role you play as a consumer. So it's totally different way of system. And what I will underline to you, only part of that is under the so-called classical political power pyramid. Very many of these phenomena are such kind what we have to find the new ways, how to get an impact, how we could awake people to do in the way which could be good for themselves and also for the society. So, and that's exactly the same we have to do. Both the national, regional, and global level. And I do hope so that European Union could have a stronger role in the future what it has been so far. And now we come also to the participatory democracy. You have already said a lot of things what I fully agree. I think that Millennium Development Goals were still the last international declaration or request for the governments. And I remember always that when we were planning to make the SDGs in United Nations, so there was a young Peruvian girl, or young, but I would say between something 20-25, and she said that when the Millennium Goals were introduced by the UN, so she thought that, wow, yes, that's it. My government has to give this education, health, and all these kind of things for me. And now she has been active working with SDG preparations, and then she said that, I noticed suddenly that it's not only the government, it's also me, myself. And this is a new type of the agenda. And so I think that that's all exactly that new what we thought. We are celebrating this year the 100th anniversary of the International Labour Organization, ILO. And I think that ILO has been quite often brought to daylight the social dimension and also the social dimension of globalization. Why I speak always about that, it's perhaps not that I'm not objective. I happen to be the co-chairing this World Commission of the social dimension of globalization, which made possible that we put afterwards, after Millennium Goals 2004, we added employment there. To do it afterwards was not quite fine, but anyway, better than nothing. But now when we think the SDGs, so something has now better at the global level. There is already now one goal which is very important in that sense, and it is labor, it's employment. And I think that's anyway some kind of progress. ILO has its own part as an actor, and it's interesting to notice that it is the only UN organization which brings together both governments, employers, and workers. And the same model was adopted also to the European Union. We have, in theory, we have this structure, we could do it. But how much we then do will be another issue. So I also, how could I say, I request you to see this participatory democracy, the others than governments, in very strongly within. And if you think the history, I think that then you see very easily that the most of the good ideas have not started by the governments, neither at the national system, neither in international affairs. It has been quite often so that the background to the birth of new ideas or legislation has been made by NGOs. And when they have demanded, requested, and fought a long time for this, then the governments have said that, yes, we do. And could, again, better late than never. But that's why I think that we should respect this kind of the activity to find the new ways to see with the fresh eyes the society still today. And this is concerning, of course, different kind of people, disabled individuals, gender equality, labor unions, and many other, refugees, or you mentioned many of these active organizations are also here present. But I mean, don't be just gentle for them. Take them seriously. Take that in why they are complaining, why they say that this is not right. They are serious people. It's not a hobby. And so one example for you more. Sustainable development in its all dimensions is a very good example in a global level. So development cooperation has often had its roots also in the civil society. And for instance, in Monterrey, 2002, for example, there were 120 official state representatives and 50 heads of states. But if we think that how many non-governmental organizations or civil societies were there were over 700. So I mean, that's the quantity. And the famous 0.7 to the development cooperation, of course, it's mainly a duty for the states. Originally, it was 1%, but then after the political discussions, it was reduced 0.7, and you can just ask that how many member countries is doing it today. So the NGOs still have an important role even in this. And now I come again back to the European Union, which is your main partner now during this social forum. So I ask you that even the European poverty is so important issue that you could also see it a little bit larger scale. Because I think that the the Global Sustainable Development Report by the Secretary General of United Nations, what was just recently said, is very clear text. He says that we are very strongly committed to the SDGs from the 2015, but we act all too slowly. So we have to do something to make the development faster. And why I'm just now very worried about the social dimension is that when we saw the different actions in Europe taking concerning the asylum seekers, it was quite bad. It was bad situation concerning human rights and all kind of the social justice, but it was also quite frightening. We have to take seriously our responsibilities. If we don't want that such kind of phenomena will happen more and more frequently, we have to also to help our neighboring areas. And then, of course, I speak also the Africa-Europe dialogue. And I do hope so, and that not only the Finland as a country of the presidency, but also if, as it now seems to be obvious, also the commissioner who will have this difficult task to carry is from Finland, Jutta Urpilainen. So I hope that the Finnish friends will stop arguing that whether that was too weak task or not, portfolio. And we have been already criticized our own countrymen and women, mainly men, and said that if it's not directly money for you yourself, would you think that it's less important? It is important. It's important for the people we are speaking about, but it's important for all of us, because this is one planet and the continents have no borders. But I will say only my last word that I'm happy to see you. I don't try to be expert concerning you. I'm only saying that at the global level, you are very much missed to have a bigger role. And I think that we have all the possibilities to have this bigger and stronger role, because we have an expertise. We come from the continent, which used to be the place of the wars, the place of all kind of the difficulties, but we have managed at the global level not so poorly. So let's be proud of what we have done, but let's also share the information and the resources. Thank you.
Was this one? Okay, there's this. No, next to the gentleman here. We have, Ms. Halonen has agreed to take a couple of questions from the audience, so this is your chance. Or you can say you hate her, she just said. So feel free to raise your hand, state your name and who you are and what your question is. You're also free to ask questions to any of the three gentlemen in the panel here next to me. We have a lady over here. Let's see, I think I'll just pass my microphone then.
Well, there is a lot of things to say, Madam, after your conference here. And what is very quietly emotional for us when you express that people are serious, they have to be taking count what they say. It's very important, not only for themselves, but for all of us. And I think that's when you speak about a new approach, that's very important, because during all those decades, we speak about to fight against poverty, to ameliorate the standing of life for everybody. And we have not achieved the goal we hope, because there is always this thought that if economic growth is satisfaction, social project, social situation is automatically ameliorated, and that's not true. We have tried a long time ago with this method of la méthode ouverte de coordination, the MOC, open method of coordination, to try to make. Ask a question. Just to say, and it's it was forgotten after a few times. It's lost, and I think perhaps we have to find a new image of this cooperation with all the parts who are set up a social Europe. Je vais m'arrêter là parce que
Thank you. So I think that I can contribute in the same way. I think so that already, if we take many of you are from Finland, so we can take an example from our own country in order to be polite for the others. So I remember that in 1990s, what I already mentioned, we made some mistakes how to tackle the economic stagnation, and we said that never again we really don't want to make the same mistakes. One was the question that cutting the education, and second was the cutting the social benefits. And we understand that if your money is in the end, it's end. But how to approach the system? And I think that we still see the shadows of this 1990s stagnation, because people are only once children, they are only once young. And then it continues these shadows through their whole life, and then they become very, very expensive experience also for themselves and for the others. But what happened then now, a few years ago, again, we made the same mistakes. Now it became the protest against that government who made it, and now we have a different combination, but yeah, the political parties are a little bit different, of course, but it can happen to many other governments too. So in that way, I don't know exactly how we could write it down and to remember that we don't repeat the mistakes what we have done, and why we say that we have to, and then we do it again. But perhaps it's something what we should be more prepared. I take another example. I'm also the member of the advisory body in mediation for the Secretary General. So our task is to try to help the Secretary General to mediate the armed conflicts and so on. But what we face again and again is that these armed conflicts have become more and more complicated, and it's almost impossible to mediate. You cannot find the old ways how it was done. And so what we have been, the conclusion is that we should do it beforehand. We should try to find a way to see which kind of the societies are stronger against such kind of the conflicts, and to learn already this, and not only to try to solve when the conflicts have already happened. We try to do our best also with those, but we should most of all to try to help member states to build more sustainable societies. And of course, the good thing is that they are about the same issues what we have speaking about SDGs. One thing what perhaps it's also because I'm the former lawyer to the unions, but I think that the role of the Red Start, the rule of law, it has been underestimated through the years, because of course the politicians' work is to speak and then to make amendments and so, but they could, even the good political will doesn't become the reality if the legislation they do will be also implemented in a way that the people can see it in everyday life. And that's why I think that good governance, very simply, good governance, and also the rule of law could help. It doesn't give more resources, but it could help people to understand how the society works. So I fully agree what you said, that we should learn about old mistakes. Thank you.
Do we have another question from the audience? Yes, we have a gentleman over there and a lady over there. And I think that's going to have to be the end of the question. Okay, a fourth, but you're the final one. Let's see. Yes. Let's see. You started. I'll be running.
Thank you. My name is Leo Williams. I'm the director of the European Anti-Poverty Network. So while we're here talking about building social Europe, the new College of Commissioners has just appointed a commissioner for protecting the European way of life, which is taking somewhat of a systematic management approach to the issue of mobile populations of refugees and migrants. I'd be really interested to just hear your insights onto this issue as to whether that's the way that we in Europe should be dealing with the issue of welcoming migrants. I would just be interested to get your insights from your background with that. Thank you.
Just to tell the audience, for those of you who don't know, this is a proposal for a new commissioner in Brussels who will be given the task of, I quote, protecting the European way of life. And this has caused a lot of criticism in the last few days in Brussels and outside on saying that what is this, some kind of way of saying that we need to be protected from migrants, etc. I'm sure you have read it, just explaining. We had the second person we had was the lady over there. I'm going to group the questions.
So I'm Lea Suoninen here from Huoltaja Foundation, a Finnish independent foundation. You were speaking about social justice, and somehow I connected it with the values we have in Europe, these common values. Do you see that they are somehow threatened? When we think about these children's rights, and nowadays we have our children in Syria, Al-Hol camp, and are they somehow threatened nowadays?
Did you say threatened? Okay. Yes, we have the gentleman here, but there was one fourth hand in the air, but I'll give you.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, let me make a personal remark. Sometimes history is funny because 13 years ago, under the last Finnish presidency, I started as Secretary General from Solidar, and you were opening my first General Assembly in Solidar in the European Parliament. So I'm very happy that, well, not only that I could stay so long time, but that at least the committed stay and the cycles or the circles are closing. Two short remarks. First of all, I very much appreciate that you made the link between international and European dimension. I think many of our NGOs are too much focused on the European dimension and not enough on the international. And I think by going outside of Europe, which I in my position can often do, also to have this other view and to be seen as Europeans and always to hear what do people from other continents like in Europe. It's the European social model. It's the European social model that makes the difference. And I think, therefore, perhaps we should take a little bit more politically than always being to the kind ones who go and comment and make proposals for improvement. Because what upsets me really is when I look now to the proposals, so my last point, for the new commission. We have a very good, well, an ally of social NGOs who will be probably the next commissioner for a portfolio which was called in former times Employment and Social Affairs, and this has become now only jobs without qualification. And no word on fighting poverty, no word on social inclusion, and so on. And therefore I'm saying, well, to be provocative, I would say it does not help to have too many women, only women in the commission, if the policy is not changing. But seriously, my concern is, do we really go forward that we have not learned out of the crisis 2008, and that, as it was said earlier, we only stay again on growth at any price, and then redistribution of wealth, instead of understanding that, in particular in the Nordic countries, it was first the redistribution of wealth through social models and social protection schemes, and then there was productivity raise, and then there was economic development. And I think we have not really learned the lessons of history.
The lessons of history. We had oh, there you are, finally. Gentleman over here. Sorry, I missed you.
Many thanks to all, and very happy to be here. Philippe Sec from CFADS, France. Okay, about the values. That very important. But today, with populism, nationalism, do we need to wait state action or take in account very, very beautiful innovations of local communities, ONG, social institution, and so on? And not add only one point of view, but I always thinking that we need export-import between our countries in Europe. That is to say, to see, for example, that in Germany there is a manual work, in Sweden equality of women, in UK good things about housing, and so on. And new innovations. That is to say that perhaps today the social security of 1945 needed to meet with a way of social protection. That is to say, not only money, but social action around social minima. And that is to say, a way for the youth to education, to jobs, future, the numeric society, way for the disabled people, way for aging people to at home or not, way also of women today. That was my question. Europe, good experience. Know them. Not make that you call in French copier-coller, but know them. Many thanks to you.
May
Strong
I
mentions.
answer? I think that the others will also add their answer.
Do you remember the questions, Ms. Halonen, or shall I repeat them, the four of them, just to, you remember them?
I think that I can.
Right,
I don't try to respond to all of them, but if I tell the story about when the Finland joined the European Union, so we made a very, very how could I say, good work for that. We tried to see that what kind of the society we have and which kind of the benefits is in our society and which might be in the risk in the European Union, vice versa. So we Nordics are very, very diligent in that way. And then we thought that European Union so far in the mid-1990s was more or less, it was trade, economics, and so on, but it was not too much about the social structure. And then we thought that certain features of the Nordic welfare society, what we had, are not in danger, that we can keep our own system and that we go on. So that was only part of the truth, because when the Commission has right for the competition rules, so and they have not the similar mandate for the social side. What they will do when they solve the issue? Of course, they solve it in the way what is familiar for them. And it's always the economics and the competition which were winning side. You can say against if you want. And so we thought that was really a little bit naive to think that if there is no mention in the text concerning the social dimension in certain way, that then it's not a risk. No. And so vice versa, that if you don't mention it, it might be that it will be the user side when it's a concerning those rights or those mandate parts which they have a possibility to give an order. And that's why we have been in the continuous struggle concerning the certain special feature about the Nordic society. And why we are so selfish, so egocentric that we think that it's good. It's partly how you took it, the question. We have noticed that money talks, but money is the only thing which is lacking when it's concerning the poor people. It's education, it might be the social welfare as such, it might be the issues of the housing, it might be the questions of health and so on. And when we are now looking at the statistics, that what it is to be a poor. So it's a shorter life, it means not so healthy life, it means also many other issues, what was not earlier mentioned when we speak about the poverty. And that's why I think that these comments concerning how we take this issue is very important. Really, it might be some difficulties concerning the rules of the European Union, how much you can handle this. But I mean that anyway, the discussion could be broadened. And I think that Mr. Niemi can also speak about this. It's not only concerning whether we have monopoly of the alcohol with the state or not. It has been many, many other issues what we have noticed. But it's also the other side is that how you interpret, how you translate these issues. I think that my countrymen and women, they are very exact when they are studying all the regulations of the European Union. Sometimes when I then ask about my friends from UK, which is now perhaps leaving, or in France, that have you noticed this kind of the problem? They are very honest. We have not even noticed that, because they are not studying all the paragraphs so carefully. So it's good to be careful, but it shouldn't limit yourself to try to make a social dimension stronger.
The question from the gentleman over there about the European way of life. Would you like to answer to that?
This is a very interesting question. I try to avoid it, but when you repeat it. So coming to the global side, so the human rights are not a European phenomenon. Human rights are global. It's also concerning whether they are political, whether they are social, economic, even cultural. And we have made small steps forward, for instance, in these asylum seekers. We might say that somebody has been, human rights are violated if somebody belongs to the sexual minority and can get a capital punishment because of that or something. But if you just tell that you are socially extremely badly excluded, so I don't know whether it could be the result. In the future, when the climate change will be even worse, so we will get, it's possible to get millions and millions of people trying to find a new home. And I think that we should very soon learn this, what we are doing. My very, very small advice is that we should help the countries already, people there where they are, the countries in the countries of the origin. Because, as I said, that immigration, whatever is the reason, is always very hard process. And if people can keep both their incomes and their friends and relatives, they would rather stay. And in that way, the movement of the people is historical, it's a fact, but it shouldn't be so definite must what this will be in the future. But perhaps you can also answer to this question. Who takes?
Did anybody have on the European way of life or other topics that we touched upon?
I mean, look, I originally come from Poland, so it's a relatively, well, it's not a relatively new member state, but Poland joined in 2004 as well. But indeed, absolutely. But it'll be a very personal answer. I mean, I left Poland in 1996 and moved to the UK. So now I'm 40 years old. So I have lived more than half of my life in the United Kingdom, and it's a country where I was able to, in a sense, blossom as a person and be accepted for who I am. And
now you are leaving the UAE.
well, exactly, but that's not my fault. And when I look, for example, at the current Polish government, which is in power, and how it has found a new target of discrimination, which is the sexual minorities in Poland, because they have been trying to fight everybody else that failed. So let's now fight the LGBTI communities. I feel very hurt about that, and if that's what protecting the European way of life means in that portfolio of the Commission, that this is something that we have to be challenging because it's completely inappropriate. The lady over there talked about social justice, and you link that to common values. I mean, this is common values. It's the acceptance and tolerance and inclusion of everyone, that, regardless of where they come from, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, whatever we want to box people in. And so, yes, I mean, for me, it's a very disturbing idea of having that portfolio, and even thinking that we have to create this sort of fortress Europe, which is protecting European values, whatever you want to describe them as. So that would be my answer.
With that, we're going to have to conclude this first session. We thank, of course, Ms. Tarja Halonen for coming with us. You're welcome to stay, of course, throughout the next panel. And the rest goes for you, gentlemen. You're welcome to stay, but we're going to have to need your chairs. So we're going to have a reshuffle now, and we're going to bring 4 panelists. Oh, yes, of course. Right, we have a debate coming up, and we are going to then get into more the works of different members of the social platform and NGOs, and also academia in Brussels. The name of this panel is, I'm going to read the very, very official, I have it in here. Regaining People's Trust, Addressing the EU's Democratic Deficit Through Civil Dialogue. I don't know how many of you in here who have followed, like this year we've had a new European Parliament election followed by a new commission. Well, this is my third, and I can say every single time there's a new bunch of commissioners coming in and new parliamentarians coming in, they say, we need to communicate Europe. We need to reach out to the citizens. We are not touching them. They don't feel a part of Europe. If you ask a French person, are you French or European? 99 out of 100 will say, je suis français. Or if you ask a Swedish person, he's going to say EU, ooh, that's somewhere in Brussels, but they will not think that they're really part of it. So how to communicate Brussels, how to communicate EU. And Ursula von der Leyen, the new head of the Commission, who is coming in, hopefully on the 1st of November, she has also said it. We need to communicate Europe. We're going to have yet another summit where we talk about how to reach the citizens. Now, a very, very important role, of course, in reaching out to the citizens is to use the platform, of course, of dialogue with NGOs, such as those represented today here at this conference. We have, however, though, had a lot of complaints throughout the years that the Commission or the Parliament or the European institutions are not properly engaging in a proper dialogue with these groups. And we're going to have a couple of different speakers who have thoughts on this issue. Now, if you heard the president or the former president, Tarja Halonen, I don't know if you saw, but I saw 2 kind of movements in her speech. One was one of regret. She said the European Union has not properly engaged in the social dimension, and I wish that they would have done it better. And then she said, the NGOs, this is not a hobby, you are expertise, you are needed for that kind of engagement. And the other line was, she also said, but we do have more presence of the social dimension in the Swedish and the Finnish debate. She also said we do have more, we have the climate change demonstrations, there is some kind of momentum to grasp here, and that it will be one of the questions to ask the 4 panelists on this panel. Now, in no specific order, we're going to ask Corina Stratulat to join us. She works for the European Policy Center, which is an institution in Brussels that's been there at least as long as I have been there, that conducts studies and often organizes debates on European affairs. Now, Corina is the Senior Policy Analyst and Head of the European Politics and Institutions Program, and she's going to talk to us about consultations that are going on with civil society. The next speaker is Gunta Ancha, yes. Oh, you're already seated. And I'm going to find your hand. And you are chair of the Latvian umbrella body for disability organizations, Sustento, and you're also a board member of the European Disability Forum. The third speaker is Ms. Laura Sullivan. She's coming down here. She's the executive director of We Move Europe, and she has also worked in the European Parliament and in the Brussels circles for many, many years. Her main expertise is NGO work, feminist leadership, and the EU institutions. So you will be bringing that to the table today. And the final panelist is Maciej Kuciarczuk. He is the vice president of Social Platform, the organizers of this conference. And I think I will move over here, and then we will start the debate. We need more microphones. Right. Is there a microphone on the table? Yeah, there's a microphone. Okay. So we have 3 questions that we are going to try to keep at the back of our heads in order to make this some kind of organized, structured debate. And those 3 questions are, and I will read it. You have them in your pack as well. Oh God, why don't I have them here? Jesus, here. How do we regain people's trust, and how do we address the EU's democratic deficit through civil dialogue? I'm going to ask Corina to tell us about your studies.
Right. Well, I will address, we can go into more detail about your questions later, but, right, can you hear me? Oh, good. I thought, what I really wanted to do tonight is actually to share with you the story of the European Citizens Consultations, which is an initiative that took place in 2018 and early 2019 throughout the EU, and which unfolded along 2 tracks. At the EU level, we had the European Commission that hosted an EU-wide survey, including questions that were formulated by a citizens panel. And then at the member state level, governments were responsible for organizing physical events and then synthesizing the results of these meetings. The member states also agreed to then discuss the results of this, to discuss the national synthesis at the EU summit in December 2018, which marked the end of the process for most of the member states. For some EU countries, as well as for as the European Commission, the process actually wrapped up at the EU Leaders Summit that took place in May this year, as we know, and which discussed the future of the EU and the strategic agenda for 2019-2024. Now, why do I want to tell you about this? Well, not only because this initiative is the latest in a long chain of similar experiments to better engage with European citizens as a means of trying to deal with the democratic legitimacy problem that the EU is facing. But also because the outcomes of this initiative, be it in terms of process, but also in terms of policy substance, is at the moment completely absent from political discourse. So it almost seems right now that the ECCs, so the European Citizens Consultations, I'm abbreviating them, have already been forgotten. And I think that this is really a shame. One of the reasons for which this is a shame is because forsaking the ECC means squandering a remarkable effort that has gone into making this happen. I mean, from the conceptualization to the implementation to, of the idea, it took less than a year. And it happened at a very complex political moment. You know, we have populism, we have crisis, we have very important elections taking place, and yet all 27 member states, for the first time, I'm not counting in the UK, agreed to participate and organized thousands of such events. At the same time, the European Commission put online this survey, which was based on questions formulated, as I said, by a citizens panel, which saw almost 100 citizens coming to Brussels in March last year, and you know, working together for over a weekend, if I remember correctly, in order to design this survey. And of course, we have hundreds and thousands of citizens themselves. I mean, actual citizens.
Can I stop you there for a question and ask the audience? How many in here have ever heard of the European Citizens Consultations? But you are in the European... okay, I'm just checking how far along you are in the audience.
Right.
Go on.
So I mean, this is nothing short of a little miracle, to be honest. And I think forgetting the ECCs now would mean essentially disregarding a massive effort. Now, there are two other reasons on which I want to dwell a little bit more, for which I think it's a shame to just let the ECCs go into oblivion. The first one has to do with the fact that the results of these consultations reflect or offer telling insights about citizens' views on all prominent current policy debates at the moment. And second, the way, the manner in which the process actually played out is inspiring for how we can possibly reform European democracy in the future. So let me elaborate just a little bit more on these two aspects, the results and the process. With respect to the results, what we learned from the national synthesis reports is that citizens brought up or discussed or expressed concerns, opinions and so on about issues like climate change, environment, climate change, like migration, like the rule of law, like European unity and solidarity, European values. Okay, so you might say this is quite unsurprising, even uninteresting, right? But actually, this is a good thing that it is unsurprising, because it means that it mirrors the to-do list of the EU. And so political leaders should feel encouraged to refer to the European Citizens Consultations as a means of deriving legitimacy, democratic legitimacy, for the work they do in Brussels. It could also help the reform-oriented politicians to mention the European Citizens Consultations results in order to push for certain progress or for certain policy discussions to be pushed to a point where they can deliver, right? So, and for this reason, actually, I'd argue that the results of the European Citizens Consultations should actually be attached in the next step to concrete policy debates and policy processes in the EU. For example, to the new Commission President's proposal to reform the asylum system, or to deliver a new Green Deal within the first 100 days in office. Okay, not to take too long time, I will refer to the process. Now, what the other thing we learned from the national synthesis is, in fact, in at least half of the national reports, European citizens have expressed explicitly the desire of having more of such consultations. In fact, in countries like Finland, because we're in Finland, Luxembourg, Lithuania, and Slovenia, they mentioned that they would like this kind of interaction to become a permanent fixture of EU decision-making. So this is the challenge that the politicians face now with respect to the ECCs. And so the expectation, if we were to close the feedback loop, is that politicians would now repeat the ECCs. But of course, if you redo a new round of European citizens' consultations, then you should do it on the basis of lessons learned. And I will mention two such lessons, right? There's plenty, and I mean, we've written quite a bit on this. We have several reports that have come out. You can read, you can consult them for further information. One of the lessons learned is that these consultations took place without any agreed framework or agreed plan. So in exchange for their participation in the process, the member states received free hand to do this, to organize these events the way they wanted. And this effectively meant that we had 26 different national campaigns, each with their own framing, the design, time scale, and so on and so forth. So huge diversity, which means that it made it really difficult for the consultations to acquire an identity or to set standards against which to be judged. And so for the next time, it's very important, I think, that we put a stronger onus on standardization in order to arrive at more coherence and more unity, and gives European citizens the impression that they are engaged in an EU-wide debate.
Do you have any suggestion as to which there's a critique that comes back when you talk about dialoguing with the citizens? They say, well, it's always the same citizens. It's not the average citizens. It's the activist who goes into each and every consultation or clicks the right box over and over. How do you think that the European institutions could actually make sure that the dialogue is with citizens in general and not just the true believers, kind of?
Well, I mean, okay, I will come. I don't know if I should answer the question now or leave it for after I finish my second lesson. I'll just say for now that it's true, even for the European citizens for this round of European citizen consultations, based on the results and the kind of concerns and priorities that came out in the reports, it's clear that we've probably spoken yet again with a very specific segment of the society, the one that is already engaged, the one that is more educated, the one that is more informed, and so on and so forth. So not reached so much into the unusual suspects. But of course, I think it's a little bit too much to say that it is the Commission's responsibility or the EU's responsibility to reach to the marginalized groups or to the fringes of the society. I think that has to be a national effort as well, and it should include civil society organizations and other non-governmental actors who have been part at this time of the consultations, but not to the extent that maybe should have been the case. Okay, the second lesson, and I'll try to be very brief, has to do, and this is probably the most important lesson, is that if you are to engage, to repeat this kind of exercises, it's very important to set the objective first from the onset. How can I say, the intention behind, nominally, the intention behind this exercise had been to consult, to collect opinions and views of citizens on the future of the EU. But in reality, most organizers use these events as an awareness raising or as a communication tool. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. Both communication or awareness raising, as well as participatory tools are important. But it is equally important that you are clear about what you're intending to do with it. Because imagine the citizens went into these events expecting that their input would be taken up by their political leaders, only to then learn that it doesn't matter at all for debate or for policy outcomes. Then, of course, we risk that it reinforces their long-standing perceptions of politicians as unresponsive, unrepresentative, and the EU as distant and developing beyond their control. Okay. I'm done with the lessons. I will just say that for the next, what should happen next? Because we have a new leadership in place. The consultations have finished, so they're still fresh, right? I think one thing that needs to happen very quickly is that we need a formal buy-in by institutions and the political leadership into these kind of processes. That means that we probably need an interinstitutional agreement which can see the member states at the Commission, the Parliament, the European Parliament, striking a deal and formally expressing their commitment to continuing this kind of processes and investing in them. This kind of interinstitutional agreement could be the result, for instance, of the conference that the new Commission President has proposed, the conference on the future of Europe, to take place in the to start in 2020 for 2 years. The second thing that should happen, I think, is that, and that's really immediately, is that the European Parliament should grill all the Commission nominees about how they intend to take forward the citizens' participation theme in the next Commission. Because this should not be the portfolio of one commissioner or two commissioners or a vice president and a commissioner. It should be a transversal portfolio in the European Commission.
I'm going to have to stop you there. I'm wondering myself whether Ursula von der Leyen is going to pull an Emmanuel Macron here and do the big consultation where she travels around to different sports, but you know, to listen to the citizens. I'm wondering what she will come up with. I'm going to turn to the lady on my left side here, who I will give you the microphone in a second. Now, the question that we had was, can civil dialogue contribute to addressing the EU's democratic deficit? What is your experience? What are you bringing to the table here today?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here today, and thank you for inviting. About democracy and about the way how we can make it better, I always could ask you a question. Do you know what does it mean, society? Do you know what does it mean, people in a society? Do you know what does it mean, civil society? Are we talking about societies, or do we talking about just people? That's a good question, because we should understand what does it mean, civil society, if we would like to understand how it works. Structured civil society, it means non-governmental organizations. So it's the way how people from very different places, from small countryside, can go to the civil society organizations to say something is wrong. We are not living here very well. We would like to change something. We would like to change something in my village. We would like to change something in my city. We would like to change something in my country, or we would like to change something in European Union. And if you are asking people in small places or even in the big cities, do you think you can change something in European Union? Do you think there is a way how you can go to the polls we just talked about and say what you are thinking about? I would say 90% would say, I don't know exactly, I don't think so, I'm just living, I'm not thinking about it. And that's the truth. And that's the truth what we should change, because when people don't know what they can do, they are not trying to change anything. But when we are talking about civil society, I don't know how to say 27, 28 countries, 27 maybe? We can ask, do we know how different those civil societies are in those different countries? Why they are so different? Because there are no rules in European Union how we can manage a civil society. How should we support civil society? You can go to some countries and the organizations of civil society would say, oh, we are in such a good position, governments support us and support in a way which gives us the possibility to be independent. So we can say anything, we can prepare a different kind of suggestions or proposals. We are ready to say what people in a country think about the government, but still we are supported. And you can go to other countries, I'm not going to name them yet, but people and civil society organizations there would say, oh no, there is no any support from government. We are doing as much as we can voluntary, but not many people are able to do so much voluntary. And that is a question. Of course, if European Union would like a very strong and good civil society, European Union should have some ideas, some rules, some ways how to support civil society. And support, I mean, not only a nice words, we have so many nice words in European Union. Support is much more about very practical supporting, about the ways how civil society organizations could bring the ideas of everyone in Europe to European Union. That's my point of view.
That was a bit of a sad display. You say that 90% would answer, I have no idea what I can change. Or but can I ask you then, so first of all, is that your experience as a member of a structured organization? And second then, if you had, say for instance, again, Ursula von der Leyen here in front of you, what would you tell her to do then in order to engage those people who don't know how much they can change?
Yes, I'm coming from structured organization. I'm also a member of European Economic and Social Committee, so it's a very structured one. But when we are talking about organizations, I would say it's very important to show for people that they are not only a small part of small city, to show for the people how important the European Union is. Because today's conference is about European Union. I'm coming from Latvia, and I think many of you know that it's a quite small country nearby Baltic Sea. And when I talk with our people, quite often with people with disabilities, and talk to them about European Union, they said, oh, that's again about Brussels. That's again about European Union, it's not about us. That's so far away from me. And then I say, would you like to go by plane somewhere? They said, yes. And then I said, do you know that you have assistants there? They said, yes. And then I say, do you know that this assistance is organized by European Union? And they said, no, it's just assistance here in Riga, in my city, in my country. And that is a way how you can explain people that those directives, regulations, I don't know, quite many different papers from European Union is about you. It's not about somebody else. And those papers are those who can change your life and make it better. And if you change those papers, your lives could become better too.
The European Union is about you, it's not about somebody else. That is excellently put. I will tell students this when I teach for the European Union. We're going to turn to our third speaker. I also want to tell the audience that at any point you can raise your hand if you want to ask Corina or Gunta questions already, or we will summarize it at the end of the debate. It's up to you. Then we go to Ms. Sullivan. You are from We Move Europe, and you have a background also in the European Parliament, so from the Brussels bubbles completely. So, horrible word.
Ouch.
What are you here to tell us today?
Oh, wow. Yeah, from the Brussels bubble, that really hurts. Why? Well, let me say why. I think that's an important question. So I come from the west of Ireland. I've lived in Brussels for the last 19 years. I spent the first 5 working in the EU institutions, mostly the Parliament, and then with civil society. And for me, the Brussels bubble, it's like any bubble. It's like you need many bubbles, right? It's not the bubble itself that's the problem, but you need to expose yourself to other ones so that the bubble becomes a bit more healthy. And what I find is that when you're there on the short term in Brussels, you only see inside that bubble and it's not all the healthiest. But as you live there a bit longer, you get out and realize, hey, there's a Brussels with a vibrancy of itself. And these, I think what the gentleman up there referred to as all the alternatives and all the roots, the ideas that are there in Brussels are there too. Wow. And Brussels is not the European Union, as someone has said before. But let me just step back and say, I do not assume that any of you in this room know what is We Move Europe. What are you even about? What are you trying to do? So let me just say a quick thing on that. And it totally relates to what Gunther has just said about belonging. So about 4 years ago, a group of people, mostly from campaigning organizations in Germany and the UK, came together to say, Houston, we have a problem. European Union is really at risk. We are worried that we are losing the fundaments of Europe. And so what they did was they set up something that's very pessimistic, but on the basis of urgency. So we know that if people don't feel belonging to the European Union, it has no future, right? So this 90% thing, this is real, and this is something we have to act on. But not just the urgency part, it was also a whole lot of hope, because with all these movements that you mentioned in the intro to this event, so, you know, everything from Fridays for Future, Unteilbar in Germany, the feminist movements just about everywhere, Refugees Welcome to, I don't know, Fearless Cities, all of these expressions of political will are there across Europe and exist locally, sometimes connected more than locally to nationally, sometimes European, sometimes international, but there's not enough of the connection across cities, across countries, across Europe and beyond. And so what we're trying to do is create those connections so that people can see that if, for example, there is a violation, a major violation of people's, let's say, labor rights in this country here, that's not just an issue for this country here, it's an issue for all of us. And likewise, if a valley in Bulgaria is being destroyed to put an EU-funded road through it, that's not just an issue for Bulgarians, that's an issue for all of us. So what we're trying to do is create a way for people to express solidarity across, but also take action, even if it doesn't affect them now. So the valley in Bulgaria, why do I care? Well, you should care because of solidarity, and you should care because the reason there's a problem there is because of a model, an economic model that is not just affecting planet, it's also affecting people, and it's all connected, right? So in terms of, I really liked your question, what would you do if Ursula von der Leyen was sitting there? She was right here in front of me when you said it. And what would you ask her? I mean, I think really, you know, there's so much, and then let's try and break it down to maybe 2 things. One is, when it comes to civil dialogue, make it real, right? So look at the Transparency International report from 2015 that showed that 75% of the top-level commission meetings are with transnational corporations. Now, I would want to say, Ursula, have you thought about that? And what that, I don't feel very proud when I go outside Europe or when I talk to my mother in the west of Ireland about Europe, when I say that this is the situation of the balance of power, because access is power. So I would want something to happen there. I'd also want the civil dialogue really to be in there. I have heard, I have not seen it myself, but that nowhere in the new political guidelines is there a sign of civil dialogue, only social dialogue. So hang on, what's happening there? Let's ask that question. Why does it matter? Because it is all about rebalancing power. And it is all about making sure that that fundament of democracy really is there. The second thing that I would ask is probably related more to what Corina just described. So it's really good that you sort of, you know, were really honest. I mean, you don't have to, it doesn't matter if you're honest because you're not responsible for these citizens' consultations, but there are major flaws in those consultations, because I think, as was being said there, the model's not a dialogue. So for a second, to get real on this, what I would say to Ursula is, Ursula, have you heard about, and it's not just because I'm from Ireland that I'm saying it, but have you heard about the Citizens' Assembly in Ireland, and have you looked at how that really worked? Because what was different between that and the model of the citizens' consultations was that it's about deliberation. You are not presented to by a panel and maybe you get to ask a question here or there. You are in the center. You're the one deciding. It's facilitated so that you have the power to express yourself. You have to come back 5 weekends in a row. You have to hear a hell of a lot of depositions from all kinds of experts, civil society, whatever. You know, in the abortion case, people heard about 30 or 40 different depositions from doctors to lawyers, but also the Catholic Church, also the NGOs, and so on and so forth, that helped them to then think about, how do I really feel about this? What is my feeling on this? The other thing was what you said about institutionalization, right? So first of all, is it supported by the state? You know, is it really something they want to do and continue over time? In the Irish case, it really affected the debate on the question of abortion. It really came in at a time when it was important to go beyond just a referendum, where there's a lot of critiques of referenda on their own, and perhaps rightly so. So, you know, what if you institutionalize that in Europe? What if you made it the case that just like, you know, what do you call it, court duty, or sort of when people have to come once or twice in their lifetime in the States and a couple of other countries in order to stand as a jury, what if, you know, according to the principles of sortition, over time in your life, a couple of times you had to come, not necessarily to Brussels, it'd be symbolically interesting to go somewhere else, but if you had to sit in a room and deliberate on the future of the common agricultural policy, or on, you know, social questions, workers' rights, migrants' rights, what if you had to come and actually think about that? It could help you to actually be more interested, because, and it's the last thing I'll say, I know you need to move on, the experience of testing out citizens' assemblies elsewhere has found that people don't need to be big democracy fans before they go in, but through this process, they learn a lot more and get motivated a lot more to come back. And that's why that feedback loop is important, because if nothing happens with your input, you're going to drop out. I think that's enough for Ursula.
Karina, you wanted to make a brief comment?
It actually continues on where you left it. Look, I think indeed you're right. There were lots of problems with the way this exercise was implemented this time around, but I have to say that we should also be realistic and accept the fact that this was the first time that this sort of exercise was happening in some of these countries. So there are member states who have almost no experience, zero experience with doing this sort of participatory events. And so we should look at it as one step forward. And I have to say that for me, the problem is not the design. I think we have a wealth of expertise, of knowledge out there. We have organizations and we have member states. I mean, Ireland is one case in point that have plenty of know-how on how to do such things the right way. So this is not the problem. The problem we have is with the institutional framework and with political will. Because, as you say, if you want to close the feedback loop, and if you indeed want to use this sort of consultations or exercises as a means of strengthening the participatory dimension of democracy in the EU, then can the current decision-making process accommodate the sort of input that comes out of consultations? I'm afraid not at the moment. And if they don't, are political leaders willing to reform the system in order to allow for this type of input? I think that's the question we have to ask. And I think the reason why the Commission President hasn't mentioned the civil dialogue is because what is civil dialogue? I mean, everything that the Commission does to engage with civil society organizations and NGOs falls under that umbrella. It means everything and nothing at the end. Finland. And there are only 3 DGs, as far as I know, the DG Agriculture par excellence, DG Home, and DG Trade, that actually has semi-structured forms of civic dialogue, let's say, under different names, right? So I mean, which brings me back. Are we willing to reform the system in order to be able to accommodate this kind of exercises on a regular basis?
Corina, I must stop you there. We will keep the question. We have a 4th speaker, if you can use that microphone. We have Mr. Kucharchuk, who is the Kucharchuk is the Vice President of Social Platform. And I know that some of the questions that you have put forward is also why are the wrong, so to speak, groups representing the causes? You told me that, for instance, why don't we, the civil society, the NGOs, represent, for instance, the les gilets jaunes, the yellow vests in France? Why are they turning to the extreme right instead of turning to people like us, the NGOs who work for their causes? Can you develop on that, please?
Thank you very much for this very easy question. I thought we were friends, but anyway, I will try. But first of all, I would like maybe to start by saying that we are, of course, now discussing the question of civil dialogue at the European level, but this will not happen without actually a strong, structured and recognized civil society at the national level. Actually, it goes from the bottom up to Brussels, to the bubble. So basically, and when you look actually what's happening right now in many of our countries, is that civil society is often stigmatized. Sometimes it's even, I would say, intimidated. Civil society is lacking resources. Yes, let's talk also about money, because at the end of the day, when you think about how to bring Europe, such a complex mechanism, policy making, to people at the grassroots level, well, that takes time. It's extremely, time consuming. You need us, representatives present in Brussels, to spend a long time to explain why we ask you as our constituency to say what you think about one or another idea that comes from the European level. All this needs structure, support, recognition at all different levels. So I would say, starting by this, and of course that goes beyond maybe the responsibility of the European Commission. So this is a call that we should, as civil society, we are calling on support, the recognition to the civil society, to the policymakers at all different levels. Then this question, why to a large extent as civil society we did not manage maybe to channel the frustration, everything which went through those movements, recent movements in different countries in Europe, maybe comes also from the fact that, well, we are in the 20th century, first century, while I would say the delivery mechanism of democracy is based on what we invented more than 100 years ago. Our democracy, how it functions, it's based mainly on mass political parties. It's about periodical elections. It's about the parliaments. But these mechanisms, for whatever the reasons, I'm not a specialist, but they are no longer probably adapted to the society, to the way citizens want to take place and participate in the way we shape our societies as they did 100 years ago. So here there is certainly a much broader discussion on how to reinvigorate democracy today. Then at the European level, I think it is not that complicated right now to take at least some small steps which can make a huge difference in the way civil society operates. There is this idea that has been already going for a while about mandatory transparency register. This does not include for the moment all the institutions. The debate was going on until the last European elections. We've got a very, I would say, strong supporter of this idea in the new Commission. The previous Vice President, Franz Timmermans, was one of those very strongly actually pushing also on the European Parliament to go beyond what initially was proposed, to make this transparency register compulsory for all institutions. Also, it's a way of pushing, going even a step further, maybe to put in place what we would call legislative footprints. So really, as you were saying, Laura, about basically balance of power. Who takes decisions at the European level? Yes, it's a shame when we look how many representatives of industry, of those who have means, money, they've got access to politicians, how quickly and how efficiently they actually they have a word on the way our policies are made. So certainly this, to put into practice the Article 11 of the European treaties, which recognizes the role of civil society, but yet without concrete tools, I think this is something that the new Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has a unique opportunity. I think we are all sitting in Europe, in our respective countries, in our societies, neighborhoods, families, looking at what will happen, what will be next, because people are definitely fed up with how Europe has been done so far. At the same time, I think it would be an enormous risk, questioning Europe, the European integration as such. What else? What's the alternative? So we have definitely used the civil society and one of those most powerful tools to make Europe function again.
Thank you. We have a brief 10 minutes, not more, for questions. So please raise your hands and keep your questions really, really super sharp and short. And then we can take more than one or two. So raise your hands in the order. We have a gentleman with glasses over here. I'm going to run again.
Bert Luits from ATD Fourth World Movement. My question is, what do you think is more powerful? So a kind of to try to have direct contact between institutions and individuals, or to work by intermediates like NGOs. For example, I'm working in an NGO, ATD Fourth World, and several times we are bringing people from different countries physically together. And we are thinking together, and it's reinforcing European identity. It's also the place where I can explain how I try to speak in this Brussels bubble. And yeah, I think I'm very pessimistic about the possibility that direct consultations can build more trust, because it's something that works for the already convinced, in my opinion.
The question is for Corina. I can answer it. No, I'm going to take one more question before. So one is about the use of direct consultations, and then you have a question.
I have a question, perhaps also to Corina. You talked about the civil dialogue structures in the Commission, but I don't think, unless I missed it because I was out of the room, we also have the Economic and Social Committee Liaison Group. And actually, in terms of the effectiveness and the interaction with the civil society organizations which are part of it, and how it's, over the last couple of years, it's been actually reforming and becoming much more open to feedback mechanisms, perhaps this is something that you could just say a couple of words about as well.
Thank you. I'm Runhausen from Oslo Metropolitan University. It's a question to all panel members. Given that we find quite different practices in the different member states, how much NGOs are consulted in the deliberation of social policies, what will it take to facilitate more policy learning across the member states, and also to feed that policy learning into discussion about the democratic deficit in the EU? Thank you. I know it's a big question, but.
Final question, gentleman, glasses over there.
Yeah, Piotr, thank you for mentioning liaison group, which I'm a co-chair in the ESC, but a comment and two questions. The comment, first of all, the question of civil dialogue. When you look what is in the mission letters from von der Leyen, it is the civil dialogue that the Commission has been organizing now for several years, and these are the big events which cost up to 100,000 euro, the event one evening, where they discuss directly. And this is not dialogue. And this is exactly the problem that we have, because it is neglecting what we call in French corps intermédiaires, the intermediate corps. And if we really, and this is the question, do we really take serious the question of counterpower? It was an old argument after 68, but question of counterpower. And by having a dialogue with excluding the organizations that we represent, that means organizing and federating citizens, we are not a power player in this, and therefore they like very much all of them, if they are called Macron or von der Leyen, they all love very much this direct dialogue with citizens, but they do not like to have interlocutors like us. Second observation, don't you see also that something has changed over the last years? What I see changing, one is there is a lot of economic pressure of NGOs. We have advocacy NGOs and we have actors. And by the economic pressure, many of us have become service providers and have lost not its soul, but let's say they are much more on service provision and activities than on anything else. And third point, don't you see also that in many countries, the classical role of civil society federating citizens is now replaced by the extreme right? They are in rural areas, they are doing social work that before has been done by social NGOs. So I think there is something really changing, and we cannot claim only to say civil dialogue and civil society organization if we do not speak on the nature also.
Excellent. Let's see. We're going to have to group the panel here. I think that you reacted to one of the comments from the gentleman here. Would you like to give a first answer?
Yes, thank you for a question and comments, especially you. I reacted to your comments that we are getting a service provider, and that is exactly what I'm very worried about, that we still don't have any understanding what's a lobbying organization and what is a service provider, and can service provider be a good lobbying organization, and can a service provider really understand the situation and provide the can fighting for the interests of the group? My answer is no. And if my answer is no, I really cannot see the way at the moment how we can avoid it. It's a just very short comment because we are in a hurry, I think.
We are definitely running out of time because of the dinner tonight. So I'm going to ask you, Corina, you had a question, I think, from the gentleman over there. The first question on the point of consultations. So that one.
No, on whether there should be intermediaries or it should be direct. And I mean, one way to answer this is to say that it depends on what you want to achieve. Again, because of course, if it's just for awareness raising or communication, then you could go along the lines of what the Commission is already doing, which is this dialogues, citizens dialogues, where you have an official or you have somebody who has some sort of expertise on European affairs going and talking to people about it. Of course, there's scope to reform even the design of these sort of interactions, but it essentially means that you have to have somebody who knows what he or she is talking about, explaining to people things and answering their questions. And this is already happening. I mean, as part of the citizens' consultations, the Commission has actually increased the number of such dialogues to about 1,300 by May this year. And it is worth mentioning that some of the member states have actually relabeled events, either citizens' dialogues or events that happen very much along the same lines as European citizens' consultations. So it's actually very difficult to say how many of those took place, but probably quite a lot. Now, if you want to do participatory events, which means that you want to have some deliberation, you want to have some dialogue, you want to have some interaction, then it's much more important to think, well, first to rally help from a broader spectrum of actors, but also then to think a bit more carefully about the design. Because one of the lessons that we learned from this European Citizens Consultations is that engaging civil society organizations without any sort of criteria, did not really improve the quality of the discussions. In fact, civil society organizations that had got engaged and had an interest were working or had expertise on European affairs, essentially started to do traditional type of events. Speaker and Q&A, right? So not much in terms of deliberation. Whereas civil society organizations that got engaged and had expertise in participatory sort of interactions, then they played a little bit more with the formats and they were more creative in how to do these things. So engaging civil society organizations alone does not do anything unless really they know what they're doing, basically. And of course, if you do want to reach out to the unusual suspects, you have to enlist support that goes beyond governments or beyond specific organizations. You have to allow more to help in the effort. I hope this answers your question. I'll stop here.
That's perfect. We have 2.5 minutes left or something. So I would like you to repeat your question and give the minimum version of it. And I will ask Ms. Sullivan and Ms. Kucharczuk to ask it again.
So the question was, what can we learn from the different member states because different member states have different ways of consulting with the NGOs. So how can we facilitate more policy learning between member states in this area? And is it possible also for the EU to learn something from some of the member states in this area, perhaps?
If I may, I'm not sure whether I will really respond to this question, but you see, when we are taking the example of my own association, older people's organizations from all across Europe, so as you are saying, covering very different, I would say, landscape in terms of civil society, how they operate, what are their financial means, the structure in their countries. But because they meet at the European level, this is precisely where they learn from each other how to go beyond, let's say, how to, surpass what they are individually in their country, in their constituency, because they see that things can be done, they are differently somewhere else. There are ideas that they can take themselves and then apply them at home. So this is, I think, how it works. But this is also, again, why I think at the European level, because at the end, this conference, this is why as social platform, we wanted to have this debate looking into the current opening with the new Commission, with the new Parliament, but also with the challenges that we already mentioned all across Europe. This is the moment where we have probably the right to say, and I don't know whether, Connie, you will agree with me, we still have the chance to ask the Commission for this recognition, for minimum standards for civil dialogue, to explain precisely what we do not consider as civil dialogue. Consultations, one-shot kind of exercises, this is not enough. We will not be happy with this. Because it's still a very, I would say, early stage of shaping how the Commission will be working with the civil society. Probably this is what we could also, as one of the outcomes of this conference, to come with a very clear call to the new president-elect and its college of commissioners, how we as civil society, what we require actually to be necessary for this process of shaping EU policy by taking the voice of all citizens.
Yep, thank you. I'm going to try and connect Connie's question to Bert's question. At the end of the European Anti-Poverty Network's event just now, the Vice President said, somebody asked her, what's your dream? And she said, well, one of my dreams is that the EU, we're so strong, we're so powerful that the EU institutions cannot ignore us. And if you want to be powerful, you really need to connect to citizens, right? And what I really like just now is, you know, maybe it didn't feel so brilliant, but the action you just did in the street, keep doing it, right? And each time get a little better, and each time it would get a little bit more confident, because there's something about Connie's question which goes to the root cause of civil society knowing its role, talking about it, talking to people, connecting. So that connects to Bert's question, which is it's not an either or, but a both, right? We need both. And as you said, in different situations, as we move, we really only work on the trying to bring people in. We're less involved in the consultations, but other actors do that and need to do that. So I would just say, there's a real chance for us to look deeply, honestly into our souls as civil society and say there's things we can improve by just talking to people. And it's hard, but there's many experiments out there we can learn from and get better all the time.
Thank you very much. And that concludes this panel. Yeah. I have to, first of all, I want to thank the panelists, of course. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, let's have a round of applause. And also, I need your ears again, because you will be joining us for the dinner tonight, and there's a lot of practical information that I have to give you. So please.